First of all, I'd like to thank the National Academy of Science and Technology for their kind invitation for me to share some of the experiences we have in education. I'll be talking about achieving high learner performance levels before, during, and after a pandemic. Specifically, I'll be talking about the CVIF Dynamic Learning Program, or DLP for short. The CVIF DLP is very suitable for situations like when you are in a pandemic. It has a proven record of being effective in calamities and lockdowns. For example, in 2011, when one of the world's devastating typhoon, Sendong, hit the Philippines, the students, the pupils, were continuously learning even during after the devastation. And another example would be the siege in Zamboanga City in September 2013. The classes were closed, or schools were suspended for 2.5 weeks, but the students continued to learn using the CVIF DLP. And 1 month later, there was also an earthquake in Bohol. And again, it showed that the program is resilient against disasters. And the reason for this is that in the CVIF DLP, students learn with zero or minimal teacher intervention. That's why it's suitable for lockdowns, and it's suitable for enhanced community quarantine, or ECQ, or the general community quarantine, GCQ, where no face-to-face classroom interactions are allowed between teachers and students. And in that sense, it bypasses internet connectivity problems. Also, the CVIF DLP has been validated as far as recent neuroscientific studies are concerned, and it's individualized, and it's so low in cost that effective implementation by any nation is possible. So the CVIF Dynamic Learning Program, which started in 2002, we refer to it as a systems approach to process-induced learning. Process-induced in contrast to teacher-induced learning. It incorporates the skills that you would like to have in students for the 21st century, which would be critical thinking, problem-solving abilities, collaboration, and communication. And the CVIF DLP has been applied at the elementary, high school, and college level. Why is the CVIF DLP effective? It is effective even in a pandemic scenario because it focuses on the disposition of the learner. And there are components, structures which would enhance this good learner disposition. One would be the parallel learning homes, and this essentially is automatic during a pandemic because it automatically limits teacher intervention from 0 to 20%. And another component, which is very essential, is the activity-based learning activity sheets, or what we will refer to as the LAS. It involves a lot of handwriting, and there is no prior or introductory lecture when this LAS is being accomplished. And two other components would be an in-house comprehensive portfolio. It teaches the students to be organized. And of course, strategic rest, which means nothing beyond the prescribed LAS for each student. So let's look at the first component, parallel learning homes. In a parallel learning homes, the students will be accomplishing the learning activities. No teacher intervention is required. And in fact, parental tutoring is also not required. But every week, whatever the students accomplish, they will have to submit it to the subject teacher. And in the next slide, we'll talk about the retrieval and distribution of the LAS in the next or succeeding slides. What is this LAS, or learning activity sheet, which is actually the heart and soul of the effectivity of the CVIF DLP? It's quite simple. It's just a one-page learning activity. And the idea is that one concept one page, and that page, when encoded, should fit into with font 14 should fit into one page. For any topic that a teacher would like to introduce, for any grade level and for any topic ranging from physics to physical education, it starts with a short concept digest, followed by an example and an illustration, and it ends with one or two questions. And the first question should really be easy, because the LAS, the CVIF DLP, also targets even the challenged learners. Now, in the CVIF DLP, we often say that an ideal learning activity is an activity which would need no teacher intervention. The philosophy is that any complex task can be divided into 10 simpler steps. And if you wish, that one single step could be further subdivided, such that even challenged learner, up all the way to the bright ones, could handle it without any lecture. That's why it's immune to lockdowns, because lockdowns essentially mean that the teacher could not intervene. And for each learning activity sheet to be done, there is no introductory lecture that is required. The children will have to read and comprehend, and this teaches them critical thinking and problem-solving abilities. This trains them and prepares them for the 21st century, where an individual has to learn different skills in his lifetime or her lifetime, and he or she has to learn independently. So the hallmark of the CVIF DLP is really independent learning. And a key to the success of the CVIF DLP is writing by hand. And this has been validated by many scientific studies. And one of these, I'll just mention one, is the paper that appeared in Psychological Science, a paper written by Mueller and Oppenheimer. And they said that note-taking with a pen rather than a laptop is better. Note-taking with a pen is superior to using a laptop. And in fact, this study focused on 300 students at Princeton and the University of California, Los Angeles. And in this study, Mueller and Oppenheimer demonstrated that students who write out their notes on paper actually learn more. In each study, those who wrote out their notes by hand had a stronger conceptual understanding and were more successful in applying and integrating the material than those who took notes with their laptops. And there are many other studies, and this has been observed in France and many other professors in the university, where it shows that writing is superior when it comes to learning. And this is automatically integrated in the CVIF DLP. And even an older study by Professor Hebb says that neurons that fire together are wired together, and neurons that fire out of sync lose their link. That's why writing the activities, it activates the psychomotor, visual, and if the student reads aloud the written activities, then it also involves the hearing, visual, psychomotor. So all parts of the brain are activated while learning is ongoing. And that's key to the CVIF DLP. And the CVIF DLP also teaches students how to be organized. Organization is also a precious skill in the 21st century, because all their learning activity sheets will be compiled in a portfolio. The portfolio can be color-coded, let's say yellow for math, white for science, blue for English, and so on. So it teaches them organization at such a young age. So those are the components: parallel learning homes, activity-based learning, a lot of writing, and then compilation, and then of course nothing beyond the learning activities. And in fact, even in the pre-COVID times, there are many performance indicators to the success of the CVIF DLP. But one of them is our students at the CVIF. 3 years ago, 25 students passed the UP college admission test. This is the premier university, of course, in the Philippines, based on the rankings. And note that the CVIF DLP is actually located in a third-class municipality, 63 kilometers from the nearest city.
and its tuition fee in school year 2019 to 2020 was just 10,500 for junior high school and 13,000 for senior high school. It's actually a mission school, and our admission is quite liberal. Almost everyone enters grade 7. We don't have elementary. So that's just one of the performance indicators. And because of its features, it's very appropriate and suitable for situations where you can have a pandemic. So when you have if you are in a pandemic, if you have a pandemic scenario, the weekly distribution and retrieval of the CVIF DLP learning activities, if you are connected, then you can do it online. The distribution of LAS downloaded by the students, accomplished by the students, and returned after 1 week to the teacher. But if you do not have internet connectivity, then these learning activities could be printed out, and there could be drop-off points for these learning activity sheets. It could be in a school, it could be in a barangay hall, in a local government unit, and so on and so forth. So it could really bypass connectivity problems, more so because no teacher intervention is required. Now, in the CVIF DLP pre-COVID and even during the COVID or pandemic scenario, because it's not teacher dominated, we allow the students to have peer tutoring. So this is also another skill which is treasured in the 21st century, the ability to collaborate and communicate with your peers, and we allow that in the CVIF DLP. So now, DLP is individualized. You can have 100 students, 1,000 students, but still individually each student has to write down and do the LAS. So during a pandemic, one question often that we receive is that, what is the guarantee that each student is learning? Well, the guarantee is that the LAS is copied individually and answered in the student's own handwriting. And this involves the psychomotor, visual, hearing faculties of the brain, and not like in the conventional teaching where you rely on it could be the Zoom or MS Teams or Google Meet. You're not really sure whether the student is listening, although he or she appears on the screen. But when the student writes, it's a guarantee that the student is learning. And in the conventional method, if you rely on just a midterm exam or a final exam, so that's the next question. With the CVIF DLP as a distance learning, how are learning outcomes assessed aside from tests? Well, the learning activity sheets are returned to the subject teacher every week, and these are studied and looked at by the subject teacher. So it could also be graded, because in the conventional system, if you rely on midterms and final exams, and if the student fails, it's too late. The student already wasted a month or two, and then you discover that that student has not learned anything. But here, feedback from the students is 100%, feedback in the form of the learning activity sheets individually written by the students and seen by the subject teacher every week, which could be part of the grade. And the portfolio, comprehensive student portfolio, can also be graded in terms of completeness, neatness, because it's part of the training for young students. So when you have a pandemic scenario, the figure on the left is something like this. The learning activity sheets are distributed, whether online or through printed copies with drop-off points. And again, let me reiterate that there is no prior lecture needed, no introductory lecture needed for each individual learning activity sheet. So teacher intervention is minimal, if ever, and parents don't have to worry. It's the CVIF DLP is the most parent-friendly program in a pandemic scenario, because tutoring by parents is not needed. Compare, for example, in the conventional method. Modules, as they call it, are distributed, and they have to do a lot of teacher training on what to do during a pandemic scenario. And then these modules are given to the students. Now, if the modules given to the students require teacher intervention, require some lectures, just like in the conventional, then I'm afraid that the outcome might not be very good. And I'll tell you in the next page, next slide, why the conventional method, wherein the teacher lecture is a requirement, can be disastrous. Note that books and modules are available, have been available for decades to the students. But then the traditional would require a lecture. So let me show you this slide. In the conventional teaching strategies, way back in 1996, there was an international assessment, the trends in international math and science studies. And what was our place? We ranked 39th out of 42 countries. And there was a teams repeat in 2000, and we ranked 36 out of 38 participating nations, only ahead of some African countries. Now, we poured in a lot of money, a lot of loans, a lot of reforms, and what happened decades later? In 2018, the Philippines participated in the PISA, Program for International Student Assessment. And what was the result? We were second to the last, number 78 out of 79 nations in math and science. And we were the last in reading out of 79 nations, even after all the reforms and all the billions of pesos poured into the educational sector. So we keep on pushing the same button, hoping that another result would come out. I think it's the wrong way. It's just not the way to go. So that's why I strongly believe that we have to get out of the conventional teaching strategies. And I would suggest, really, CVIF-DLP, it has an 18-year track record. Let me note that the CVIF-DLP has been adopted within the DepEd. DepEd means Department of Education, in the DepEd's alternative learning system. Specifically, I might mention Region 10 and La Union, the province of La Union, where they have developed learning activity sheets, and they have this smart learning school in a bag, helping the alternative learning system. Now, if you really think deeply about it, what happened in the pandemic scenario? During a pandemic, 100% of the students are literally out of the school. They will be learning outside the four walls of the classroom. And it will be community-based. Learning has to be done with the help of the community. Now, this is the essential characterization of alternative learning system, where students learn outside of the classroom. And so I think that I would suggest that DepEd should learn from the deep and long experience of the alternative learning system in non-formal schooling. And note that ALS Philippines has also received an international award in 2002 for this pioneering work of non-formal schooling outside of the classroom, which is what is really happening when there's a pandemic scenario. I would also like to mention that about 10 years ago or more, the then directress or director of the Bureau of Alternative Learning System, Dr. Carolina Guerrero, visited our school in Hagna, Bohol, and studied the CVIF-DLP. And from what I noticed, she really liked the learning activity sheets compiled in portfolios, which is very good as assessment in the alternative learning system. So how do we go? What are specific recommendations? Well, I would recommend that to avoid another generation with mediocre educational outcomes, to avoid this disaster, the ALS division within the DepEd, which has adopted the CVIF-DLP, which has developed the learning activities, which requires no minimal teacher intervention, that this ALS division should be expanded and and would be mainstream and allowed to spearhead the protocols of what to do in times of pandemic within the DepEd. And again, this is my closing statement, just to repeat that the CVIF-DLP bypasses both the lack of internet connectivity, and severely limited face-to-face learning modes. It bypasses internet connectivity because teacher intervention is minimized or even zero. Moreover, the CVIF DLP is cost effective. It's so low in cost that, and you can get high performance outcomes from the Filipino students or even any student all over the world, that, and it could be adopted because of the low cost by any nation. It could be adopted effectively. So let me end with that. And for details, especially about learning activity sheets and how to make, maybe you can go to dlp.ph, which is hosted by Smart Communications. And if you want some samples in learning activity sheets at the senior high level, especially chemistry, you can go to eduversum.org/CVIF, which was created by the Science Corps. And thank you very much. And I hope you learned something from this lecture.